A warm welcome to everybody, and thank you, Sony Asia, for the kind invitation in sharing my works on the Sony Venice platform. My name is Teck Siang, and I'm a cinematographer from Singapore. Today, I will share with you two projects that I shot on Sony Venice, a music video and a commercial. Every project has its unique challenges and requirements, and in this presentation, we will focus on the creative decisions made and how it goes hand in hand with the technical requirements. The first project I'm going to talk about is a music video, Girls, directed by Joanne. This project was entirely shot in a studio, and it also stars Vava, a Chinese rap artist, and the segments was shot against a blue screen in China, while everything else was shot in Singapore. While prepping for the music video, the challenges and the objectives that I had was we wanted to use a set of round Lumos anamorphic lenses with the Sony Venice. Now, the full frame aspect ratio of the sensor would be 3:2, and with a 2 times anamorphic lenses, the final discrete image would be 3:1. We also wanted to shoot the project in a higher resolution than the delivery format of 4K, knowing that oversampling would help us get a cleaner result for the image and produce better signal to noise quality. First off, I would want to touch off a little bit about image circles of lenses and the diagonal of image plane. Lenses are designed to project out a circular image onto a sensor or film plane, and the size of the projected image circle is determined by the design of the lens. When we are choosing any lens for a digital cinema camera, we must make sure that the image circle of the lenses must be able to cover the sensor. Well, the problem today is that digital sensors are not well standardized in the market, and many Super 35 sensors do vary. And for the large sensors, we have like the full frame, the large format, the Vista version, and so on. Some of these sensors are wider, and some of these sensors are taller. A website that I use a lot is this lens coverage tool designed by Florence Mills. It has a database of cameras, recording formats, and lenses. It also has a lens expander option. Now here, for example, I have the Red Monstro in 8K 16:9 paired with a vintage 50mm Cook Speed Panchro. As you can see, the image circle in red cannot cover the whole of the 16:9 circle that's in blue. This is a still frame from a short film project, and the lens here is the exact 50mm Cook Panchro, and the sensor used is the Red Monstro 8K in 16:9. The final image or the final project was finished with a 1.66:1 crop, and this is the still that I wish to talk to you about. If you can see the image and notice that there are apparent distortions around the edges on the left and right of the frame. In this case, we are starting to stress the lens, and we are starting to use portions of the lens that's not meant to be used. Here is a video clip of the same scene. And if you notice carefully, you could see a little bit of ghosting around the edges on the left and right, particularly in the wide shot. And it is such distortions or perhaps imperfections that now that we are actually trying to achieve with vintage lenses on larger sensors. This is another still from a short film, and this is where I use a set of 80 Cinevision anamorphic lenses on the Red Monstro. Well, if initially it was 7K 6:5, which was the sensor area that's closer to a Super 35 format. But in this case, I chose to use the 8K 6:5 and on the Red Monstro, and that meant I was using the areas of the lenses again not meant to be used. Now, if you notice carefully on the left and right corners of the image, you see some very obvious smear and distortion. Now, this is likely due from the combination of both the front anamorphic element and the 80s Japanese glass behind. These were the set of lenses that we wanted to use, and we did use for the girls' music video. It's a set of Lomo round front anamorphic lenses, ranging from 35 to 50 and 75. The three lenses have a t-stop of 2.4 to t2.5. Now, the issue is that the coverage for these lenses were meant for the Super 35 format and not for the full frame sensor. So in order for the lenses to cover the full frame sensor, a 1.6 extender was used. And this will also apply to Super 35 spherical lenses that cannot cover a full frame sensor. When in using an extender, we will actually result in a light loss of about 1.3 to 1.5 stops. Hence, the dual ISO of the Venice was ideal. At a base ISO of 2500 and factoring the light loss, I could still rate the camera at approximately 800 ISO. Lastly, the Lomo lenses were not super fast at t2.4 to 2.5, but shooting full open on a larger sensor would actually create a more shallow depth of field. Using back the lens coverage tool, which I spoke about earlier, and here I have input the Sony Venice sensor at full frame 3x2 and selected the Cook Speed Panchro, which is actually designed for the Super 35 format. As you can see, the image circle of the lens in red cannot cover the 3x2 sensor in blue. We would actually see the lens barrel. Now, by actually adding an expander, whereby you increase the focal length of the lens, the image circle is now able to cover the sensor. An average Super 35mm lens would have an image circle diameter of around 32 to 35 mm, while an average Super 16 lens would have an image circle diameter of around 15 to 18 mm. Most full frame lenses would have image circles of around 43 mm. The problem today is that it's harder to find an accurate image circle of vintage Super 35 lenses or lenses that can combine several optics together, such as anamorphic lenses that have Japanese, Russian, German, or British glass with an unidentified or Russian-Japanese anamorphic front. So many databases like this website will not have the image circle of selected vintage glasses. But as they were all made for Super 35, we can expect them to be between 32 mm and 35 mm. The best way is to physically test these lenses, and that's how it should be done. This image was a test on the 35mm Lomo round front with a 1.6 extender on the Sony Venice full frame sensor. This is the 35mm at t2.5 full open, and the subject was at about minimum focus 3.5 feet away. Now notice the abbreviations or or rather the imperfections of the lens at the sides. There is also a slight vignette from the lens barrel. Aesthetically, there's more distortion and poor optic performance at the edges. At the full 3x1 image, we are actually stressing out the lens at the left and right sections. And this is a frame from the test shoot of the music video during our pre-lighting. You notice that the center of the lens will actually yield the sharpest image. In the shooting with the anamorphic format, we try not to place our actors or talents at the edges of the frame, just to avoid distortion. This is the wide shot with the same lens. The 35mm had the most distortion, but it had a certain quality that we desired. It has a signature distortion of the wide anamorphic lens. And these stills that I'm sharing with you are the ungraded still frames from the music video. This is the 35mm lens. And this is the 50mm Lomo. As you can see, there's less distortion, and we had one shot that we needed a set extension done in post-production, and we used the 50mm to get the wide shot instead of the 35. This is the 75mm lens. As you can see, the 75mm lens had the least distortion. The Venice has three recording formats for Sony RAW in LT, ST, and XT. Knowing that we needed a large amount of footage in the music video, I opted for shooting on ST format. We also used a LUT that was a little bit more low contrast than the standard Rec 709, and we were very specific about the colors that we used for the lighting on set. Our live color grade was not via a remote system, and actually our colorist Saunders graded on the 709, and he would upload it graded footages onto Frame.io. Using Frame.io, the director and I would actually leave our comments, and that's the way that we did for the work process in the color grade. The following images I'm going to share with you are from the music video itself. The top image is the LUT that we use on set, and the bottom image is the final grade that we had. As you can see, even with the LUT, we were more than 50% close to the final grade that we wanted. In the final grade, we did crush the blacks, and we did adjust the color temperature of the whites, and we also tried our best to preserve the skin tones, which was very important. In scenes whereby we would have saturated colors, we actually controlled the saturation levels only in the grade. During the lighting process, it was important that we did not oversaturate our lighting on set, especially with the red or blue channels. This is largely due to the Bayer filter on most CMOS sensors, where most pixels are dedicated to green, then red and blue. It's better to push the saturation of the colors in post, as I mentioned. Here, the top image is the actual lighting on set, and the bottom image reflects the color contrast created after pushing the saturation levels. Again, in this still, the final look did not differ too much from the set lighting. Shooting on the X-OCN ST held sufficient information in what we needed. We would not see the benefits of shooting on a higher quality X-OCN XT. We work with two sets in the studio, where the dance sequence would take place in the larger set pictured here. Due to time constraints and budget issues, we needed a lighting approach and set design that could be manipulated to look like there were different sets. Tina Feng, our set designer, did a great job in designing the set to be recyclable into a different format, and LEDs were the preferred choice of lighting units. The set also had panels that changed accordingly to the intensity and the spread of lights used. Here is a simple still from the lighting test done with the Asteria Titan tubes on the polycarbonate material of the panels. These were the panels that were used as the backdrop of the set. For the lighting approach, we could only secure 10 times aperture P300 novas at a time, and these novas were rigged above a seamless magic cloth that resulted in about 2 stops of light loss. But the magic cloth created a very soft lighting that was ideal, and the seamless cloth meant that we could use it as a ceiling. When these LEDs were pushed to the primary colors or solid colors, the intensity of the light dropped, and we are about 1 to 1.5 stops below ideal exposure. But yet, we were able to recover some of these details on the X-OCN ST codec. This is the same stage, and working with the LED Novas as the overhead main source of lighting, I was able to create a variety of looks. And in this way, we kind of cheated, or we kind of pull off to seem like the set had different looks, or that we were using uh, different sets. Here are some behind the scenes pictures to share. I was using the Sony Venice mainly on the Atlas 7 360 head. Most of my movements were done on a Magnum dolly with crane or on a slider. The next project I'm going to talk about is a commercial, power to power, directed by Jake. In this commercial, we use a wide variety of optics. The main set of a prime lenses was the Zeiss Supreme Prime's Radiance, and we had two wide lenses in the Zeiss Supreme Prime's 21mm and the Canon Sumeri 14mm. We also had a Tokina macro at 100mm and a lower probe lens for several shots. The challenges of this production was the use of three different aspect ratios in the commercial itself. Jake, the director, also wanted very wide shots in the interior of an electric car using quick whip pans and handheld tracking shots. We also had several low-light scenes in the kitchen and auditorium. And lastly, there will be two probe lens shots whereby the maximum aperture of the lens was limited at f14. I decided to use a Sony Venice for its full-frame sensor to accommodate the different aspect ratios. This was very much preferred to using a Super 35 sensor, where I would lose more of the sensor coverage in using aspect ratios like 3:2. We also had access to the Sony Realto system, and that was ideal for shooting handheld, especially in tight spaces like the interior of the car. I could easily do whip pans and handheld tracking with the radio extension unit inside the car. When using the f14 probe lens, I could rate the camera at 3200 ISO, and it certainly helped in the lighting setup. We also use several lookup tables to help us achieve a base look on set. These LUTs that you see are the result of collaboration between Sony and Technicolor, and they are available for download on the Sony website. I selected a range of LUTs from this collection that either push the warm tones or the cool tones. These are some of the selected stills of the commercials that we shot in full frame 3:2. In this case, I'm actually using the full sensor on the Sony Venice. These are the selected stills in the 2.4:1 crop from the full frame sensor. And in the commercial, the way we changed the aspect ratio was to use the letterbox as a transition. So the letterbox would actually move to change the aspect ratio of the shots. And that means that we needed to shoot some shots with two aspect ratio guides. This was possible on the Sony Venice system. These are selected stills of the commercial in 16:9 with the Sony radio extension system on a handheld configuration. I could actually get shots inside a car interior as pictured by the frames on the left. As for the recording codec for the commercial, we decided to use the X-OCN XT, which is the highest recording mode. Um, due due to the requirements of having some VFX, a chroma key scene, the higher recording mode was preferred. And I would actually strongly recommend shooting on XT for commercials to allow full creative options in post-production. And next, I'll be sharing some behind-the-scenes stills. Here we can see the Sony Venice Rato system with the lower probe lens. Now with the smaller body, I could actually use the 100mm tripod system, and this was much easier to set up on a slider system for the probe shots. This is the probe shots on a loop, and the change of the letterbox is how we actually shifted between the aspect ratio. So we were recording the entire commercial in 3:2. This is how we actually set up the Rato system with the tilt-up cage for handheld. The cables were about 5 meters long, and as my handheld shots did not require any running, we could actually put the base system close to where I was shooting, and the base system itself would actually set up on a 150mm system. Now I could actually shoot handheld with this configuration without the need of an easy rig or without having anyone next to me. With the handheld shots, I was able to do quick tracking shots with my hands, and I was able to do very simple and efficient handheld movements like these. And as mentioned, we had several shots in the car interior that the director required me to do quick track-ins with my hands and whip pans with the camera. So with the extension unit, it was really easy to move the camera around the interior of a car. Even on tripod shots, we decided to use the 100mm system as it was much easier for me to move around and set up the camera. Our camera assistant Dean actually built his mini station on the base body of the Venice, and that's where you actually keep his remote focus, wireless transmitter, and onboard monitor. We found this setup really useful as my camera assistant had access to the main controls on the camera body while I was operating the lens on the Rato system on a smaller 100mm unit at a close distance. As you can see, keeping the camera on a 100mm fluid head allowed me to easily set it up on dolly systems. In this chroma key setup, my camera is actually on an offset arm, and I'm using the boom and dolly movements on the Magnum itself. On the night scenes, I switched to the base ISO of 2500, and this actually allowed me to use smaller lighting units and also work with existing practical lights. These are the strength and key features that I found in using the Sony Venice for the music video and the commercials. I find the dual base ISO very versatile when we have a lot of on-location shooting. And in many on-location shooting itself, we most oftenly have to mix the practical lighting and our film lighting on set. The dual base ISO is also very ideal for night or low light scenes. Or like for instance, when I needed to use the probe lens, the switching to the base 2500 ISO would actually allow me to get more stops out of the f14 lower probe lens. The 6K recording format was also very ideal for oversampling, and in both the projects that I presented, we rarely had any, or we did not have any case of aliasing or moire. Also, the large format is an exciting platform. New full-frame lenses and vintage glass that are being converted to cinema housing today actually gives us more options for a choice of lenses. The Rato extension unit also puts a power pack camera into a small form factor, and I found this really useful in situations where spaces were tight. There are a couple of further improvements that I hope Sony will implement in the Venice or the next model. Today, a lot of our cinematographers are using older lenses in a different way with large sensors. We are embracing image fall off, distortion, and ghosting at the edges of this image as aesthetic qualities. Perhaps an imager that can allow some customization of the sensor area to be used with a lens will make the camera more versatile. And I hope that they do consider in building a lighter and smaller body for the future model. And feedback that I got was that perhaps a built-in mini camera mic would be useful. And finally, um, we could incorporate D-tap options on the Sony radio extension unit. I've come to the end of the presentation. Thank you for your kind patience, and I hope you have found the information useful. These are the viewing links to the toolworks described in the presentation.